Okay, welcome back to another Between the Pages book chat special edition for Crystal Lake Publishing authors. And today we have Kyle Toucher with us, and he's going to be talking about his horror thriller book Live Wire. So I'm going to turn it over to him for a minute and let him introduce himself. So take it away.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, my name is Kyle Toucher. I'm sitting here in Southern California. Glad to be on the show with A.F. Stewart today. And Livewire just came out, was put into release yesterday. And Crystal Lake Optimal bought it, I guess, in July of last year. So it takes 9 months to get through the system. A couple of edits, a little bit of formatting, and this and that, and here we are. So the elevator pitch I like to give people about it is maybe it's a little cheeky, but imagine Stephen King and Michael Crichton on a lunchtime bender planning atrocities, and so that's kind of what you get. Because when I was really young, those are two authors I read a lot, and so there's a big horror element in there, and there's a little bit of a sci-fi element in there as well. And the tagline for the book is "Black Magic meets Big Tech. What could go wrong?" So, two great tastes that go great together. And so the part of the premise of the novel is that you have we have an evil corporation called Medusa Engineering, who is involved in something called Project Dragonfire at the VLA. For those who don't know, the VLA is the Very Large Array. It's an array of 27 gigantic and 95-foot tall radio telescopes in New Mexico. This place really exists. And so they are trying to say, like, harvest a God particle, let's say. And they end up summoning something, and wackiness ensues.
Well, wackiness is always good.
Okay, yeah, wackiness. Yeah. Yes, it's a slapstick comedy, but it's not. But but as the story progresses, a big part of the thing is that as part of the horror element of it is that something has gotten into the power grid. And if you're familiar with, what a high tension transmission tower is, those 100-foot steel towers you see on the sides of highways or going over the hills, well, those have become animated. And they're lumbering along these 100-foot giants. But at the same time, the grid itself is emitting something called the signal that happens to get into the darkest regions of your mind and harvest your guilt, your shame, your shortcomings, basically stirring up things you don't like about yourself, and they end up manifesting in different ways. So people have to deal with this inner psychological terror while they're dealing with almost Godzilla movie size problems outside. So you have the macro and the micro of the horror converging on these people who are sequestered in a small, for a large part of the story, sequestered in a small desert gas station while all of this is going down. And the story takes place in the early 90s. So if the phones are cut off, there's no internet, there's no mobile phone, there's no sat phones. If you're cut off, you're cut off. No one's coming to help you. And a lot of our attention arises from that.
Mm. It sounds like you've got a little bit of the old sci-fi movie influence in the book.
Well, when I was young, I mean, luckily I wasn't born in Bangladesh or anything like that. So I was able to watch what was on the air at the time when I was a kid was a lot of 50s sci-fi stuff, Kronos and Them, and, movies like that, these black and white, dangers of the atomic age. And at the same time, all the Universal monster stuff, plus Godzilla things, and there were giant monsters. And so it was all kind of this big stew of different influences. It was just going directly in and writing on the motherboard when I was young, and it stayed there. And I've always liked it. Plus, I always liked the music in it as well, and that ended up affecting me as well. So by the time I discovered Black Sabbath when I was 13, oh my God, it was all of the things together. It was like getting the ultimate club sandwich. And so all of these things ended up being direct influences on how I write today. And when I was a really young teenager, I read The Exorcist, probably too young, and I didn't realize books could do that. Most of the input was visual through films. And then once I read a real adult novel that had a horror element in it, pretty much hooked after that, right?
Yeah. So tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about the characters. Who can we expect when we read the book?
Well, the one of the characters we open the story with is a guy by the name of Pale Brody, and he's off. He was a he was a musician in a band where everything went bad for these guys. They put out a signal that put out a single that flopped. The label dropped them. Their tours were canceled. Everything went bad. Marriage fell apart. The whole bit. So he and his son are headed off to Austin, a new life, and they're on the road in New Mexico when all these things start occurring. When a storm starts coming in from the east, and they end up trapped in this at this gas station. So at the fuel station, other characters arrive. Ken Lightfeather is he's a Native American trucker, big 6'3" cat, cool as they come, who has a big 44 on his hip, and we got to get a kind of a feeling that maybe he knows what's up. He's been around the block. Now down the road from this is where this Medusa engineering project is taking place. So these events are told a little bit out of linear time, but then they all converge in the middle of the book and we move linear together because everybody from our characters at the VLA and our characters at the gas station converge, both dealing with this, and they go together to the end. So there's Pale Brody, there's Ken Lightfeather, there's also Nikki Barlow. She is part of Medusa Engineering's team that was part of Project Dragonfire at the VLA when it all started to go wrong. And she's the one who first suspects occult influence. And because black magic meets big tech, what could go wrong? And so she ends up making it out of the VLA and ends up with our people at the gas station. And they have this they just endure this hellish night of abuse as the towers rage, the storm rages, all their inner horrors are surfacing. And they have to find a way to confront brute force and self-doubt with nothing but human resolve. And at dawn, it all comes together on the road. It's a big showdown on the road with cars and giants and fire and guns and death beams and everything. There's a huge action sequence in the middle with AC-130 Spectre gunships attacking the VLA. So, there's very large scale stuff. So here you go. I told you it was Stephen King and Michael Crichton on a bender, put through a Michael Bay filter.
Oh, that does sound very exciting. That does.
Written by a guitar player who happens to be a VFX artist. So,
Okay, so do you have any themes that run through the book?
Well, a lot of it is a lot of the stuff that when I tell you these people are dealing with their guilt and their inadequacies and their self-doubt, a lot of it is based on their failed relationships because that's really all that matters in life. So their relationships with, in a lot of cases, their wives or their children have disintegrated by different means, and one of it's terribly guilt-ridden. Otis Thompson, or man who owns this gas station, his wife never let him forget the fact that he talked his son out of his baseball career to join the Marines. Kid joins the Marines. He's killed in the Beirut bombing of 1982. His wife never lets her forget it. And then when she passes on, and so she slowly lets her diabetes kill her as a way to get back at Otis, which is just a wretched thing to do. And so all those pleasant memories surface. And so part of the themes here is just the anguish people go through when their relationships are severed or mismanaged, and all the heartbreak and years-long struggle it is to get over those things. That's also a big part of it. In the middle of all this crazy, sci-fi terror.
Interesting. Sounds a little bit like one of the Sandman episodes in that respect. So fun.
Oh yeah, I don't know, but so I guess the horror element is actually a really personal thing, whereas the sci-fi element is big, large scale, over the top, big budget filmmaking, I guess, in a way,
Okay, so what was the hardest scene or type of scene that you had to write in the book?
Well, the thing is about none of it actually was really that difficult because it originally started as a short story I wrote in 1986. The band was on the road. I was in a band called Dr. No, which was one of the early punk rock metal crossover bands. So we were on the road, and I would see lines and lines of these towers. And I was reading a lot of, like Skeleton Crew and Night Shift and Clive Barker and a lot of Lovecraft at the time. And I wanted to get serious about writing when I had the time. Anyways, I started thinking maybe I should write something that's kind of like trucks, but it's, there's these things walking around. What would that be like? I'm 23, And so I wrote the story in 1986. I wrote a few drafts of it. I think I sent it out to a couple places. It was rightfully rejected. Rewrote it again in my early 30s in the 90s. And that's when I started adding in the other components about the VLA and what became Medusa engineering and all that. So when the COVID hysteria happened in 2020 and everybody was biting their nails and wearing masks and doing all that shit, I used that time I took the story out. And I said, well, I'm going to rewrite it. And then as I started getting into it, I realized there was a novel there. So I took what was probably a 45-page manuscript, put it through the filter of the life I've lived now at 60, 58 when I wrote it. And all that life experience helped me really write a much more cohesive story with real people and real characters. So a lot of the action bits are the bones of the story that became the novel were in the 90s version. Let's put it that way. So there's the only thing that was that I found difficult as I went through the process and then hired an editor to do it was the realization that some of the character development wasn't as finessed as I thought it was until I passed it off to an editor and got it back. And then and that opened my eyes to a lot of things. That's what I'd recommend to anybody, hire an editor. It works wonders, especially someone who doesn't know you and never heard of you, wouldn't recognize you on the street, and that was the greatest thing. So I guess what was most so was the realization that the characterization on those early drafts wasn't as rich as I thought it was.
Yeah, you can delude yourself in those early drafts out, right? An editor is very
Well,
helpful
in a lot of cases, what's going on, right? I mean, haven't you gone through your own manuscript and blown right past typos and not even seen them?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah. Then you're like you say, you run it through a AI checker or something. You go, oh my God, it's full of typos, And but the editorial experience really helped me a lot about character arcs and things that you take for granted in really well written books, right? But when you're building that thing and you're not really experienced at it, there's a lot to learn there. And so it's I don't know exactly if it's I don't know if humbling is the term. It's very educational, because it would be pompous to say that it was humbling because I didn't assume that I knew how to do it, which is why I sent it to an editor, So I can't overstate the importance of that step, especially when you're first starting out, But I had nothing but time then. We had just finished Top Gun Maverick, so I wasn't going to work for a few months anyway. Then all of this happened. It was a perfect opportunity. So I took it. I wrote 2 novels during that entire period there of shutdown and lockdown and all that.
Okay, so what was your favorite scene or type of scene that you wrote in the book?
I have a couple. There's a scene where Otis, who I told you about, who's tormented by the memory of his wife, he's in a shed with Ken. They're trying to start the generator because the power's out, and she's speaking to him from beyond. And finally, he starts, as the lightning flashes, he gets glimpses of her coffin leaning against the wall with her in it, pointing an accusatory finger at him, and really letting him have it. And there's a lot of tension in that one, and as you'll see when you read it, and it became a very tense situation because it's not only the shame and the guilt that's coming in, it also, because it's a malevolent force, it also wants to manipulate you. So it's trying to get him to enact violence on his friend, on Ken, while all that's happening. There's a lot of tension in there. And another one that was just pure fun to write is there's a very, very large action sequence in the middle where AC-130 Spectre gunships, for those of you who don't know, is a giant propeller-driven cargo plane that has cannons mounted on its port sides. All it does is lean left and blow things up. And so 2 of those are sent in to destroy the VLA. And it's just a giant visual, party of mayhem and destruction that was super fun to write. It was fun to rewrite it. It was fun to rewrite it 3 times. You know, I love rewriting. Rewriting is actually really where most of the fun is. You know.
Yeah, I enjoy the editing and rewriting too. So, not a lot of
I mean,
authors do apparently, but
what's that?
I said not a lot of authors do apparently. Most of them complain about the editing, but
Well, I mean, when you're in the zone and the first draft is coming out and you're just,
mm,
slapping down the story, if you go like the next morning or whatever and, and you look at the text, you'll start seeing things wrong with it, typos, you know, clunky sentences and stuff like that. I'll fix some of it, but I'll just keep going because I don't want to lose the scent. Right. So you just keep going. And then when you come back to your editorial drafts, I think that's where the fun is, because that's where you can start to shape things and make them look and make them cool. It's kind of like whittling or carving, I guess, to
yeah,
a wood carver. He can see that block and he can see the, the banister or the balustrade or the table or whatever he's going to carve in it, or the sculptor with the marble, right? So when you get down into the details, and that's where all the fun,
yeah.
which is the exact opposite of visual effects, because the details are what drive you nuts.
Okay, since
Yeah.
you've given us that nice segue, tell us about some of the visual effects that you've done.
Yeah.
You must have some
Well,
stories. You said you've worked on Firefly and Battlestar Galactica, to name 2.
Mhm. Oh yeah. I was just fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time. I started my visual effects career in 1998. I was 36 years old, and I started at Foundation Imaging. For those who might know, Foundation Imaging was the first people to bring full CGI effects to TV in a show called Babylon 5. And
Love that
I
show.
oh yeah, these are OG. I mean, these are the guys.
Mm,
And so when I was in my mid 30s, I was just kind of going nowhere, and I didn't. And there's a story behind that too. But anyway, if it wasn't for Slayer, I wouldn't have my CG career, because Slayer covered one of my songs on a record called Undisputed Attitude, and the advance money that they gave me allowed me to buy a decent enough computer to learn the software that got me my visual effects career. How bizarre is that, right? And so when I eventually met Kerry King, their guitar player, at a Morton's in Anaheim, the steakhouse in Anaheim, I told him, I go, you know what, man? Yeah, a guy introduced myself. He knew who I was. And I said, the Emmys on my shelf are directly because you guys covered Mr. Freeze. He just couldn't believe the story. So anyway, so I started my gig there on a kids show, and then we went into Star Trek Voyager and other things like that. And I was learning from the best guys at the time, because this is the place I was getting all the Emmys and getting all the work. And it's just how it was then in the late 90s. And when that place fell apart, not long after 9/11, we all moved to what became Zoic Studios, and we did the pilot for Firefly. And a lot of us who were at Foundation Imaging. And then that show took off, but it got canceled in the middle of its first season, which was disastrous for everybody because the show was first hitting its stride. We loved working on that show. It was great. They let us do what we want. And we were all doing the handheld CG camera thing, which people weren't doing yet. And that got us hired on the Battlestar Galactica pilot in 2004. And so that was a long project. That was probably at least 12 months, I think, on that pilot, because they were just kind of winging it. And by the time that went into its first season, I was already on the Serenity film. So I was on that movie too for 18 months as they were getting at the first season of Galactica and some other projects. So I joined the Galactica team for the rest of their existence, from season 3 to 4 to all the Galactica spin-off films, to Caprica, to Blood and Chrome, Razor, all those things. A lot of those shots, out of those space battles, stuff like that, I did those. And I killed Starbuck. I crushed her Viper. That was me. And sorry, I told Katie that too at the rap party. She goes, "It was you, huh?" I go, "Oh, sorry." But it was a great experience. We got 8 Emmy nominations out of it. I got a statue for that. I got a statue for Firefly. And it isn't that it's the me show, but I was just involved in a great team that stayed together for a long time. So it's like a good band. The more they play together, the better they become, right? And there becomes a shorthand. You have all these assets to work from. You have all this pre-built stuff. So if you need to put a nebula together, you can do it in an hour. So after that many years, we were a machine. And so the last large project I was on was Top Gun Maverick, and which was the sequel to a years later, 30 years later, after the original Top Gun film. And our job was to do the jet sequences in CG before they flew them, so we could make sure everything worked, make sure it was going to cut. Is the Navy going to fly these? And then we did the post-viz work after that too. It was the first whack at all the visual effects shots, because about 90% of the airplanes in the movie are completely real. You see Tom Cruise in the back of that jet pulling G's. That's absolutely real. He's in the back seat of an F-18 that's going Mach 2 vertical off an aircraft carrier. That's completely real. But in some cases, when you're going to destroy a $40 million aircraft, you do that in CG instead, and and other things like that. So,
Yeah. I
but
would think
yeah,
the
it was
Navy
probably very
frowns at destroying a $40 million aircraft.
he was willing, and apparently the story I heard is that Mr. Cruise was willing to learn how to fly the F-18 because he flies jets, he flew those choppers in Mission Impossible. He's a bad dude,
Yeah.
And I think Lloyd's of London probably put the brakes on that. I don't know,
Yeah.
but he's willing to
Yeah.
learn how
It's
to
like,
fly an
yeah, yeah.
F-18.
We'll only insure you up to a point, Mr. Cruise.
Oh, every time that guy goes to work, I'm sure that whole company just, perhaps Scientology wrings its hands in glee. Who knows? But I'm sure the insurers are really, anytime he signs that Mission Impossible deal, who knows? But they were all great projects to work on. So I've been doing it since, for a long time, and I've been fortunate to be on a lot of really cool TV projects at the time. So I was never on Game of Thrones or any of that other stuff that came along, after our tenure, and now you see VFX on TV that are absolutely feature level,
Yeah.
it's just absolutely, there's stunning stuff on TV now,
But yeah,
you know.
I mean, as a watcher of most of those shows that you just mentioned, I mean, I
Mhm.
I I as a viewer was impressed with the special effects. I mean, I love the stuff that you did in Serenity, especially the
Yeah, especially at the time,
yeah,
I mean,
the scene where the Reavers are fighting with the oh
I did, yeah, I did most of that. There's a
oh
very
that
long
that was
shot, like
stunning, by the way. That was stunning stuff.
there's a very long shot where the Serenity is weaving through the battle,
Yeah.
and I did it all as one. And she's actually in 3D. She's moving on two axes, and she's doing an S curve on X and an S curve on Y. And as she moves down Z, Z being vertically, I mean horizontal, straight along, and and then the camera is just following her through the shot, but it looks just massive because there's all this destruction going on around her. It's when he's doing "I'm a leaf on the wind" when he says all that stuff when they
Yeah.
cut outside what's going to. So that's probably the largest, longest shot. I did the very end too, where she's sweeping out and she loses the door and it comes into the camera and he's talking to her. The opening shot where we're on the logo and we come around and various other things. But there was a lot of other people involved in that film too that did some great work. And we were just so thrilled that we had a chance to come back to Firefly again and have a little more time and money, try to make it look a little better, and there was a 15th anniversary Serenity online thing where she flies over a desert. We follow her into orbit, and Zoic called me and had me do that. And that was really cool to do too. And apparently Joss Whedon got a little teary when he saw it. So that's nice to know. It's you can find it somewhere. Firefly 15th anniversary, I think it's called. Or maybe it's 20th. I don't know what year was it. Probably 15th. And I'm sure you can find it. So I did that stuff too. But like I said, it's not the me show. I was full part of a very talented, great team with problem solvers and people who could write tools if we needed them, or I'd do the shot up to a point and pass it off to somebody else who's good with fire or water or explosions or whatever. So I ended up focusing mostly on shooting. So that, coming back to Live Wire, is what helped, I think, orchestrate the action sequences that were the way they are in the book, because they're giant and they're cinematic. When you want to run out to your car and give me an $80 million check to make that movie, I'm happy to do it. Tell you what,
Okay.
because it's you, I'll do it for 60.
Okay, so you've obviously started off your writing career in horror and thriller. Are there any other genres that you'd like to explore in future?
What I like about those is that it's kind of wide open, right? You can do pretty much anything. I mean, because you can still have romance and valor and victory and pathos and everything in the middle of having a giant tentacled something from beyond crawling out of a volcano, right? I mean, sky's the limit. You're
Yeah.
not, you know, I it doesn't have to be Saw. There's nothing wrong with slasher films. People love
Mm.
those, but I mean, the horror is more of a spectrum, I think, than a genre. You
Yeah.
know, because you can
Yeah.
do it because it's almost limitless. You know,
Yeah.
and you can put
I
elements of everything in it.
Yeah, I recently did a panel on horror, and then we were talking about just that subject on how wide ranging that it can be. So
Yeah, that's the beauty of it because I mean, every life honestly has some horror in it.
mm,
You know, I mean, most do. I mean, I don't care if you're a Rockefeller. There's some horror in your life somewhere. And it doesn't mean that we all have to roll around in the dirt of our ghastly experiences, though. But it's just like I said earlier, the entire range of human uh, emotions with our relationships with the people around us, anything can be inserted into that because it's a very wide gradient. So anything's possible, you know. And there's some people who are very good at that with space opera and all that kind of stuff too. But I think horror having the supernatural invade the everyday in one way or another, it's extremely fertile ground, and that's opportunities to explore what people really do in those situations, right? The first Hellraiser film isn't really about the Cenobites, right? It's about Frank and Julia. It's about that corrupt family going down the drain and obsession. That's really what the movie's about. Pinhead's only in it for about 6 or 7 minutes. you know. So that's the beauty of it.
yeah. Okay, so are there any upcoming things for you?
Well, prior to Livewire coming up, in front of that, I did there's a novella called Life Returns, which is a straight up gothic horror story, family drama, right? And kind of a domestic problems in there with a big horror overlay. And I released that 2 weeks before. Well, Crystal Lake was fortunate enough to release it for me for free on Amazon in front of Livewire to grease the skids a little bit for it. But what's unique about that is that it's based on a song of the band Dr. No I was in the 80s, which was kind of a revenge from the grave type, metal horror thing, right? So I took the premise of the song and wedged it, finessed it, let's say, into the fictional universe I'm building now. So a lot of my stories intersect and overlap and relate to and refer to one another in some way. So it's kind of a whole, not homogenous, it's kind of a whole universe, I guess you could say, right? And so I did that and especially targeted it at fans of the band who are still there and still liked what I did in my 20s. So if you were a fan of that and are curious what I'm doing now, that's why I wrote it as a bridge between the music life and into the writing life with the whole VFX thing in the middle. And so that's also available on Amazon through Crystal Lake as well. So that's called Life Returns, and there's Livewire. Both are out right now, and it's hours of fun reading. And it's in Life Returns is for free on Kindle and whatever digital formats, and Livewire is of course in Kindle Plus or whatever that's called, and good old fashioned paperback. And then there's links there on the author page to the other, some of the anthos I've been and everything too. I'm just getting out of the gate. And a lot of my stuff mostly has been in Crystal Lake Publishing Shallow Waters competition they do every month. And all of those things overlap. All of those things relate. So, and they also tie into Livewire. So it's all big soup.
It sounds like you've got the start of a shared universe there, but
hey, I'm willing to do that. That's something I can do into my 80s, right? I'd sure like to. Let's hope it catches fire and everybody wants to come along for the ride, because I guarantee it's going to be fun. And whatever the culmination of that whole arc is going to be, it's going to be gigantic. It's going to be full of action. It's going to be shit blowing up. There's going to be a lot of blood.
Okay, so I think we'll wrap the interview up here. I'd like to thank you for being our guest today. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, on that positive note.
So tell everybody where they can find you and your books.
Well, you can find me at kyletoucher.com. That's kyletoucher.com. And you'll find links to Life Returns and Livewire there as a special and a unreleased Dr. No demo we just put out yesterday called Tell Me There's No Devil. And it's absolutely thunderously heavy. So there's heavy music, heavy writing, big horror, everything you need at kyletoucher.com. Hope you come along for the ride because I'd like to have you with me because we're just starting.
Okay, so I'd like to thank viewers for joining us today and join us again on April 28th for another. Oh, we got one comment here just before we go.
Oh,
There's London Blue wants to join you in the universe, so that's nice.
well,
She's
there you
another
go.
horror writer I know. So,
Oh,
um,
good. Well,
and
well,
we'll
Life
be
Returns is free. Give that a read and we'll talk.
yeah, okay. So we'll be back on the 28th for another Crystal Lake Publishing interview, and this time we're talking body horror with 3 authors. So join us then.
Oh, for the Dark Tide thing that's coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, the
Okay.
cover of that is cool. Did you see the
Oh,
cover
yes, it
art?
is. Yes, it is. It's very cool.
Yeah.
It'll be out. It's up on
Yeah.
the
Nice.
thumbnail. It's up on the thumbnail for the scheduled video if anybody wants to go see the cover.
Yeah, it's nice work. Yeah.
Okay,
All
so
righty. Well, thank you for having me, and thanks everybody for listening and watching and putting up with me and listen to me run my mouth.
okay, and that's all for now. Bye.
All righty. Kirk out.